You stand in the grand hall of the Doge's Palace, Venice, the year 1075. Marble gleams beneath your feet, polished so smooth the golden light of 1,000 candles dances across the floor. But the beauty is shattered. Something is wrong, terribly wrong. The richest men of the Republic, merchants, nobles, advisors, are gagging into silk handkerchiefs. Their eyes water. Some bolt for the doors, abandoning duty and dignity alike. The enemy isn't an army, nor a conspiracy. It's a smell. A stench so vile it drifts from the royal apartments above, where a Byzantine princess is dying in a way no one can understand. Her name, Theodora Duchina Selvo, and her decline will become one of history's most haunting mysteries. A mix of cultural clash, vanity, and disease, so shocking it nearly paralyzed a kingdom. The stench from her chambers is unbearable. Servants refuse to enter, courtiers scatter. Even her husband, the Doge himself, struggles to remain in her presence. This is no ordinary sickness. Chroniclers would call it an illness that seemed to rot the body from the inside out, a decay that baffled physicians and terrified everyone who came near. Before we dive deeper into this forgotten story of palace intrigue and medical horror, if you enjoy uncovering the dark secrets of history, hit that like button and subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because what you're about to hear isn't just another tale of royal excess. It's the story of how one woman's way of life turned into scandal, how her choices were twisted into a symbol of sin, and how medicine in the Middle Ages was powerless against the unknown. Theodora was no ordinary bride. She came from Constantinople, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, a city so advanced it made the rest of Europe look centuries behind. Running water, carved marble, dazzling mosaics, libraries and luxuries Venice had never dreamed of. When Theodora married Doge Domenico Selvo in 1075, she carried that world with her, and it unsettled everyone she met. Venice was growing rich from trade, but at its core, it was still a sprawl of muddy islands, fishermen's huts, and merchant warehouses. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, and Theodora wasn't even the first. 70 years earlier, another Byzantine bride, Maria Argyropulina, had scandalized Venice with strange customs. Chroniclers were still gossiping about her decades later. Both women would be remembered as symbols of luxury, so foreign it bordered on dangerous. The storm began with something that seems laughably innocent today: a fork. At her first Venetian banquet, Theodora sat radiant in silks that shimmered like water, her jewels flickering with firelight. Then she raised a small golden utensil, 2 delicate prongs on an ornate handle, and used it to lift food to her lips. The hall froze. Merchants and diplomats, hardened men who'd faced storms and swords, watched in silence. She did not touch the food with her fingers. To Byzantines, this was normal. To Venetians, it was monstrous. The whispers started instantly. What sort of woman thought herself too holy to eat with her hands? Why use a tool that looked disturbingly like the devil's pitchfork? The fork wasn't just etiquette. It was a symbol of foreign ways, of luxury pushed to blasphemous extremes, of a woman who seemed to despise the customs that had served humanity since Eden. Priests muttered that pride like hers was an invitation for judgment, and the fork was only the beginning. Theodora's daily routines made her seem more sorceress than wife. While Venetians bathed rarely, fearing frequent washing made the body weak, Theodora demanded rainwater collected in ornate vessels for elaborate baths. She refused the public bathhouses, considering them beneath her. Her chambers burned with incense and herbs, filling the palace corridors with scents no Venetian had ever known. She wore gloves dusted with perfume. She introduced finger bowls, napkins, and candles that burned brighter and cleaner than any in Venice. To her, these were comforts. To them, it was an invasion. Because in 1075 Venice, life was a war against stench. Unwashed bodies, fish guts, animal waste, rotting food. The wealthy carried tiny bouquets called nosegays just to endure the smell of the streets. And here was Theodora, not masking odours, but erasing them entirely, replacing them with fragrances that seemed unnatural, otherworldly. Luxury, yes, but also frightening. You quickly realized Theodora wasn't just bringing new habits, she was making a statement. Every bath, every jewel, every perfumed glove whispered the same message: the Venetian way of life wasn't enough. And she didn't stop there. Inside the Doge's palace, she recreated Constantinople itself. An imperial court bloomed in the heart of Venice, ladies in waiting, chamberlains, pages, all arranged in a hierarchy lifted straight from the Byzantine throne room. Where Venetians were used to informal gatherings, Theodora demanded ceremony, she expected reverence. And she got it. Her clothing left jaws slack. Venetian women wore practical fabrics for a city built on mud and sea spray. Theodora swept into rooms draped in silks so fine they shimmered like water, threaded with gold, encrusted with gems. Her jewelry didn't just sparkle, it glowed, bending firelight until she seemed almost otherworldly. Her meals became performances. Tables groaned under pure gold plates and crystal vessels that glittered like ice. Servants presented course after course as if the very act of eating were theatre. For Venetians accustomed to scooping food with their fingers from wooden bowls, the sight was staggering. But what unsettled them most was Theodora herself. She wasn't ashamed, she didn't temper her tastes. To her Byzantine mind, luxury was no sin, it was civilization, proof of human brilliance. Beauty, refinement, art, these were triumphs to be celebrated, not temptations to be resisted. Venetians, however, saw rot beneath the gold. Priests muttered that such excess would rot the soul, while nobles whispered she was steering Venice toward moral collapse. And yet, they couldn't look away. This tension grew like a fault line under the palace. Some Venetians began imitating her ways. Women powdered their faces, perfumed their sleeves, and gathered for elegant entertainments modelled on Theodora's soirees. Merchants smelled profit, racing to copy the crystal, the silks, the scented oils. But just as quickly, resistance hardened. Preachers thundered that foreign ways would damn the Republic, that Venice's strength came from humility and tradition, not Eastern decadence. The city was splitting into factions, and Theodora was the spark. And then disease struck. To understand what unfolded, you need to step into the medical world of the 11th century. Physicians still leaned on theories from Galen and Hippocrates. Illness wasn't biology, it was sin, imbalance, even divine punishment. Hygiene's link to health was barely understood, and palace life was a breeding ground for disaster. Poor sanitation, stagnant air, waste piling up in close quarters, feasts that left leftovers rotting in kitchens. Nobles lived amid luxury and infection. So, when whispers began that Theodora was unwell, no one expected what came next. It started small. Servants noticed her morning baths were shorter, less elaborate. The incense in her chambers burned less frequently. She seemed tired, distracted. Nothing alarming, just the strain of adjusting to a new city, a new life. But then came the change no one could explain. Physicians called it an internal corruption that began to show outwardly. Her body itself seemed to betray her. The decline was subtle at first, but within weeks it became grotesque, so grotesque that chroniclers struggled to describe what they saw. The first undeniable sign was the smell. It didn't matter how much incense she burned, how much perfume she dabbed on her gloves. A foul, organic odour crept from her chambers, not the sweet haze Venetians associated with her presence, but something darker, heavier, something alive. At first, officials shrugged, perhaps spoiled food, or a fault in the palace drainage, easy to blame the pipes or the kitchens. But days passed, and the odour only thickened, sinking into the stone itself. Servants, men and women who had endured the filth of medieval Venice all their lives, now gagged when they entered her rooms. Veterans of foul kitchens and disease-ridden alleys turned pale and stumbled out retching. The scent clung to them like a curse. And everyone began to ask the same whispered question: what was happening to the princess? You can almost smell it now. The rich incense, the exotic herbs, the costly perfumes, once symbols of refinement, are powerless against the stench that seeps from Theodora's chambers. And she knows it. Theodora, the dazzling Byzantine princess who once commanded awe, now feels her own body betraying her. Physicians, trained in Constantinople, far more advanced than their Western peers, come armed with confidence, rituals, and remedies. But each attempt fails. Bloodletting, herbal concoctions, dietary restrictions, prayers whispered over her bed. Nothing stops the unseen force tearing her apart from within. Life inside the palace begins to fracture. Servants no longer step inside her chamber. Instead, they develop a grim ritual, leave food and linens at her door, retreat quickly, and cover their faces with perfumed cloths. Even the loyal whisper prayers under their breath, not out of devotion, but out of fear that her fate might somehow spread to them. And as her condition worsens, the palace transforms into a place of terror. Theodora's husband, Doge Domenico Selvo, is caught in a cruel bind. He married her for politics, yes, but in time, he grew to respect her brilliance, her grace, her foreign elegance. Now, that same elegance decays before his eyes, while the Republic watches his every move. If he abandons her, he loses face. If he stands by her, he risks his court, his alliances, his city. Physicians grow desperate. They prod her, diagnose her with imbalances, claim her Byzantine customs, her perfumes, her rituals, even Venice's salty air have corrupted her body. Yet soon, even they can't bear to remain in her presence. The stench has grown so strong, it clings to anyone who enters. Servants say the odour seeps into her clothes, her bedding, even the stone walls themselves. And still, she remains conscious, trapped in full awareness, watching her body rot, watching attendants recoil at the sight of her. No merciful fever, no delirium, just the unbroken torment of knowing she had become a living horror, alone in her ornate chambers. The princess who arrived, surrounded by ceremony, now has only 1 or 2 attendants brave enough to care for her, though even they can't endure for long. Venice spares no expense in searching for a cure. Physicians are summoned from across the Mediterranean. Greeks, Arabs, Italians. Strange remedies flood her bedside. Powdered minerals, exotic animal parts, and potions mixed with substances so rare they border on the mythical. Some healers whisper of Eastern secrets, performing rituals as though her condition were the work of sorcery. But nothing helps. Each attempt fails, leaving her weaker, sicker, and more humiliated. And now the political consequences tighten like a noose. Venice's growing empire depends on trade and alliance with Constantinople. If word spreads that the Byzantine bride is cursed, diseased, or punished by God, the scandal could shatter everything. But the walls of the Doge's palace cannot contain the whispers. Servants flee with stories on their tongues. Merchants pass rumours along the canals. Nobles carry tales to their estates. The truth mutates as it spreads, becoming darker with each telling. And soon, all of Venice begins to believe that what stalks Theodora Duchina Selvo is not an illness at all, but a judgment. And this is only the beginning. Theodora had once dazzled Venice as a symbol of Byzantine grace and refinement. Now, she had become something else entirely, an omen, a living warning of how quickly fortune, beauty, and power could rot away into something unspeakable. The cost of her suffering bled into every corner of the palace. Gold poured out to pay doctors, incense merchants, carpenters, even architects. Every curtain reeked. Every tapestry seemed poisoned. They replaced furniture, burned oils day and night, and summoned healers from distant lands. And yet, the stench only spread, creeping like an invisible enemy into every corridor. Servants were breaking down. Some had nightmares. Some starved themselves because food reminded them of the smell. Loyal attendants from Constantinople wept in secret or fled back across the sea rather than watch their mistress wither. Those who stayed did so out of loyalty or fear of dishonor, but even they worked in shifts, darting into her chambers like soldiers into a battlefield, holding their breath as they dropped food and bolted out again. Theodora herself remained painfully aware. Historical records say she understood the toll her presence took. She begged for her rooms to be drowned in the perfume she had once used for beauty scents, that now served only as a desperate mask for decay. The contrast was unbearable. This was a woman who had introduced Venice to the finest silks, the most delicate dining rituals. Now she lay in a chamber no one could enter without gagging. The palace transformed into a nightmare. Diplomats refused to enter. Venice's government quietly shifted meetings elsewhere. Terrified foreign envoys would whisper of the Doge's cursed bride. Her illness was no longer private. It was threatening the city's very reputation. And through it all, the princess's mind remained sharp. She could see it. She could feel it. The revulsion in the eyes of those who dared look at her. The pity in the whispers of servants outside her door. The knowledge that her very existence was destroying not just her body, but the empire around her. The final weeks were worse than anything before. The stench seemed alive, seeping into walls, saturating stone, as though the palace itself were rotting from within. Physicians wrote frantic notes, describing colours and textures of flesh they could not name. Some said her body was breaking down from the inside out, rotting while she was still awake, still conscious. Think about that, fully aware, fully alive, yet forced to endure as her body betrayed her, inch by inch. And just when it seemed no more horror could unfold, it did. The palace was running out of answers, so officials cast their net across the Mediterranean. Physicians came from Constantinople, Alexandria, even Baghdad. Each arrived with bold theories, each left defeated. None could slow the nightmare consuming Theodora. Some claimed it was in her bloodline, a curse of Byzantine royalty born from centuries of political marriages. Others insisted it was her perfumes and exotic cosmetics reacting with Venice's damp lagoon air. They proposed bizarre purification rituals. But instead of healing her, these treatments only deepened her suffering. Desperation grew. Scholars combed ancient Greek and Roman texts, praying for precedent. They found scraps of stories, strange illnesses, unearthly odours, but no cures. Meanwhile, the palace itself was beginning to crumble. Wood rotted. Stone walls sweated with a corrosive damp. Fabrics decayed faster than they could be replaced. It was as if the building was dying alongside its princess. And the smell, my God, the smell. It drifted beyond palace walls, down city streets, across markets and harbours. Venetians began avoiding entire districts. Merchants complained their stored goods were ruined simply by proximity. Even the air was turning against them, yet Theodora remained conscious. That may have been the cruelest twist. She could see the horror in people's eyes, hear their whispers, feel her family's honour collapsing with her body. She kept writing letters, fragile messages to Constantinople, though handling them was a risk. If any survived, they would be priceless windows into her tormented final days. Palace staff invented strange new rituals just to function. Secret pathways sealed from the smell. Alternative routes for diplomats so they would never glimpse the truth. Guards abandoned their posts, overcome by nausea. The stench itself became a kind of security system. But through it all, two nameless servants endured. Only they remained at her side in her final weeks, returning again and again when all others fled. Their names are lost to history, but their courage left whispers that still echo. Theodora's decline baffled medicine, terrified the people, and unsettled nature itself. Rats and insects fled her chambers. Dogs howled at the air. Even wildlife sensed that whatever was happening to her did not belong to the world of the living. And so, in 1083, death finally came, a release, a mercy, yet also the birth of something much larger. For even before her body was laid to rest, her legend was taking form. A tale of decay and mystery so shocking it would spread across Europe, whispered in taverns, recorded in chronicles, and retold for centuries. But here's the question: what really killed Theodora? And why has no modern diagnosis ever fully explained it? The woman who had once dazzled Venice with her Byzantine sophistication died alone in chambers that had become uninhabitable to everyone except herself. Servants who discovered her body reported that even in death, the mysterious condition that had plagued her final years showed no signs of abating. Palace officials faced an unprecedented challenge in handling her remains. Traditional funeral preparations were impossible given the state of her body and the overwhelming odour that intensified even after death. The elaborate Byzantine rites that would have honoured someone of her status had to be abandoned. replaced with measures meant to contain what had become a public health crisis. The Doge himself, Domenico Salvo, was forced to make unthinkable decisions. Historical records show he authorized the immediate sealing of the princess's chambers, transforming them into a tomb within the palace itself. Venetian craftsmen worked tirelessly, operating in shifts and wearing cloth masks soaked in vinegar and aromatic oils, yet even brief exposure left them gagging. Tools corroded faster than usual, mortar set strangely, and every moment of the construction seemed touched by the same unnatural force that had claimed the princess. The aftermath rippled far beyond the palace walls. Merchants found goods tainted by the pervasive stench, some forced to discard entire shipments into the lagoon rather than risk contamination. And yet, the tale of Theodora Duchina Salvo endured, preserved in palace archives and whispered in Venetian streets for centuries. Her story reminds us how the collision of cultural pride, medical ignorance, and human vanity can transform one person's life into a tragedy that echoes across time. Whether her fate was cosmic justice or a cruel medical mystery, the doomed princess became an eternal warning about the dangerous intersection of power, excess, and forces beyond human understanding. Even after the princess's death, her story refused to fade. Venice rebuilt around the sealed chambers, but whispers of Theodora Duchina Salvo haunted the palace for generations. Scholars debated the true cause of her mysterious illness, some pointing to exotic poisons, others to rare genetic conditions from centuries of Byzantine royal marriages, and still others believing it a cruel cosmic punishment for defying local norms. Her tale became legend, a chilling reminder of how fragile human life can be when medicine, culture, and power collide. Theodora's life had been marked by brilliance and sophistication, yet it ended in isolation. Her extraordinary habits misunderstood, her body betrayed by forces that no one could control. Historians now look back and see more than just a medical mystery. They see a woman ahead of her time, a cultural ambassador whose presence forever changed Venetian society. The perfumes, utensils, and rituals she introduced gradually became part of Venetian life, a subtle testament to her lasting influence. But for those who lived through her final years, Theodora's name was synonymous with fear, tragedy, and the unsettling reminder that civilization's finest veneer can be stripped away in an instant by forces we cannot comprehend. She remains a haunting figure in history, beautiful, brilliant, and terrifyingly human, a story that still fascinates and unsettles anyone who learns of her fate.